Good morning. I am honored to be invited to join you at the 13th annual SVA NatCon. I want to personally extend my gratitude to CEO and National President, my dear friend Jared Lyons, for this invitation. I also wish to extend a warm welcome to all of the chapter leaders and student veterans across the nation. I'll begin my remarks with another deep acknowledgement of gratitude. I want to thank each and every student veteran for your military service and for your ongoing commitment to the defense and protection of our country. We salute you and we honor your sacrifice, your families, and hold sacred the memories of all of our fallen service members. I am honored to be speaking with you during Black History Month, a hard-fought American tradition conceived of by the Black historian and author Carter G. Woodson, one of the first scholars to study the African diaspora, including African American history. Woodson said, "Those who have no record of what their forebears have accomplished lose the inspiration which comes from teaching of biography and history." In my work at the ACLU of Louisiana and in my decade-long career as a civil rights attorney, I've studied Louisiana history with an eye toward understanding the intersections between race and law, recognizing Louisiana's centrality to the birth of racial segregation in this country. You may know the famous legal phrase, separate but equal, but you may not know those words came from a landmark 1896 United States Supreme Court case called Plessy versus Ferguson, which upheld the constitutionality of racial segregation in public facilities in Louisiana. I am proudly the first African-American woman to hold the title of Executive Director of the ACLU of Louisiana in our organization's 65-year history. The ACLU of Louisiana was founded in 1956 during the Civil Rights era and began with a group of Black and white New Orleanians, many of whom were lawyers, meeting together to develop a legal and community-based organizing strategy to fight segregation and miscegenation laws. To honor this history, my team at the ACLU of Louisiana are committed to dismantling white supremacy and structural racism in the state of Louisiana and in the American South. We do this by challenging the systems of mass incarceration and immigrant detention. We fight voter suppression and educate voters on their fundamental rights to the ballot. We combat police violence against people of color. We uplift the rights of trans and LGBTQIA+ peoples, as well as reproductive rights for women. We also seek to do the hard work of redressing and repairing the harms of slavery by supporting descendant communities and igniting the consciousness of Louisianians by telling untold stories of oppression and resistance. Scholars and researchers hearken to three great inflection points in American history. The first, the Civil War and the 12 years of Reconstruction that followed. Second, the Civil Rights Movement of 1960s. And third, the largest and the most racially diverse social movement in American history, the Black Lives Matter movement of 2020. What makes each of these historical timeframes significant, and what do they share in common? A deep reckoning with racial injustice. And what can we learn from each of these time periods? The vast majority of African Americans who lived on the land we now know as the United States between the years of 1619 and 1865 knew only the terror and torture of being the literal equivalent of human property. They survived in this condition of human bondage for 246 years of chattel slavery. That's the equivalent of 12 generations of African American people who were enslaved. Between 1877 and 1950, there were at least 4,400 documented racial terror lynchings of Black people in the United States. And Jim Crow segregation, which means codified legal segregation in our schools, buses, restaurants, neighborhoods, and public accommodations, persisted until the 1960s, when the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were passed. The historian and scholar Richard Rothstein, in his book, The Color of Law, reminds us that until the last quarter of the 20th century, racially explicit policies of federal, state, and local governments defined where whites and African Americans should live. Today, racial segregation in the North, in the South and Midwest is not the unintended consequence of individual choices, but of unhidden public policy that explicitly segregated every metropolitan area in the United States. In fact, the discriminatory policies of our US government prescribed Federal Housing Association loans and even the GI Bill, which excluded Black families and even Black veterans from accessing home loans and educational opportunities. There are three key principles in my mind to increasing the racial equity quotient in this country, and they are patriotism, proximity, and progress. And I believe that our student veterans possess these principles in spades and can lead us forward in this important work. The first is patriotism. The veteran community possesses a profound understanding of the heights and depth of patriotism. For you, it is not performative. It is deeply personal and fundamental. You know what it means to lay down your life for a cause that you believe in. And in my view, patriotism has defined and been defined too narrowly in this country. We must conceive of those who struggled for freedom, citizenship, the right to vote, and to be treated fairly under the law as among the most patriotic citizens in our country. And we must also honor their sacrifices and redress them. Embracing new ideas about patriotism and welcoming Black Americans into this coveted circle of honor will lay the groundwork for shifting our distorted beliefs about the deserving and the undeserving, the valued and the devalued, the favored and the disfavored. The second is proximity. Brian Stevenson, a civil rights lawyer and a personal hero of mine, says that before we can solve a problem, we must first get proximate to it. We must first get close. You, as members of our armed forces, have been proximate to pain, loss of life, trauma, and to those who've experienced those same hardships. You've defended the seat of our government. You've been dispatched to save lives during catastrophic and natural disasters. And in the face of these challenges, you've displayed unbelievable courage. You have forged relationships on the battlefield and off with folks of different races and ethnicities, people who worship and love differently. We need you to model that radical courage, to bring your lived experience to the table, to deepen our humanity, to sharpen our focus on empathy, and to remind us that we can do hard things. And finally, progress. When you have privilege, you have power. And we all have privilege. And now is the time to use it. Not being racist is not enough. Now is the time to be anti-racist. Now is the time to develop what Dr. Barbara Love calls a liberatory consciousness, wherein we move from awareness to action and from action to allyship. What must we do to actually actualize allyship? We must study history. We must read. We must listen. We must donate, march, vote, call in, speak out, step up, and lean in. How you use your power is a choice. Choose reflection over rebuttal. Choose courage over comfort. Choose to inhabit a brave space rather than a space of safety. Choose progress over perfection. In a time of racial reckoning, millions of Americans are tired of consuming a zero-sum game and deeply want to co-author a new American story, one that depicts our shared future with safe and high-performing schools, infrastructure, fair wages, quality healthcare, and education. We can do this together as a nation, and I believe that our veteran community stands at the forefront of this challenge. I welcome each and every one of us to co-author a new American history together. Thank you.